AI Agents with Daniel Ward.
The Azure and DevOps podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using the latest in .NET, Azure, AI, and DevOps. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. The show is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm. Find them at www.clearmeasure.com. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. My guest today on the show is Daniel Ward, and he is a Microsoft .NET MVP and a software consultant at Lean Techniques in San Antonio, Texas. He works with teams to deliver high-quality software through modern engineering practices, including effective CI/CD, automated testing, AI adoption, and product management. His background spans multiple industries such as finance, retail, agriculture, and he served as a software developer, a technical coach, an agile coach, tech lead, among many other roles. And Daniel is also a conference speaker, and he's a contributor to the .NET community and the creator behind Dan in a Can, where he writes about .NET testing, DevOps, and developer tooling. And outside his professional work, he enjoys playing piano, guitar, swing dancing, and doing game development. And we'll include all the links for him in the show notes, including daninacan.com and leantechniques.com and LinkedIn profile. But Daniel, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Awesome. Great. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I was kind of excited to talk to you because you have been doing a lot of work around AI agents. I want to ask you about that. But before we get into it, I always like to ask my guests for you to kind of go back to earlier in your career, just so that listeners can get to know you a little bit. Do you remember what it was that kind of gripped you and propelled you into this line of work where, you basically talk to a computer most of the day?
Yeah, I've got kind of I can condense it. I've got kind of a funny story with that. But basically my whole life, I did not plan to go into computers. I planned to go to med school. Even through college, graduating college, I just did not want to major in biology or chemistry or something like that. So I was like, what if something doesn't work out? It's hard to get a job with those degrees. So my dad said, well, why don't you try computer science as, just in case that can be a backup. So, okay, I'll do computer science. So did that, still planning to go to med school the entire time. And then graduated with computer science degree and got a job. And I was like, med school's expensive. I'll just save up some money first. And got a job, worked for a couple of years, and then I just kept working and didn't stop working. So that's kind of how I got where I am now. Partially, ended up just really liking it, / being good at it, / couldn't justify going into that much debt. But it ended up working out for me, and I really enjoy it. So, yeah.
Nice. Well, you've been doing this for a while, and so you've gotten really good at personally writing code. And now, of course, with artificial intelligence, things are changing, and none of us know exactly, okay, how's it going to shake out a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? But one thing that a lot of people are talking about is this concept of AI agents. And of course, all the vendors are trying to own the definition of it and what it is and what it is not. So you've been doing a lot of work with it. Just to get into that, how do you think of what the heck an AI agent is and is not?
Yeah, like you said, it's kind of, there's been a lot of semantic diffusion around that, right? Like a lot of, the word agent got popular and then a lot of people started using the word agent for different things. And now it's, depending on who you ask, means something different. So to me, an agent just means you have an AI, you have an LLM, in one way or another, it can sort of make decisions on its own. You're not just straight talking to the model back and forth. Maybe you ask it something and it decides on its own, I need to go look in a web browser. I need to look that information up. That's agentic to some degree, right? And so that's not saying a whole lot, but that's ultimately all it means to me.
Gotcha. So besides the different vendors wanting to put their own spin on it, um, what are some examples that you have found that just are really, really useful for taking a little bit of some prompting in LLM and sticking it somewhere and it just being a slam dunk good idea?
Yeah, so I have a few things. One of the, I don't know what to call it, a pattern, a technique, strategy. One of the things I found to be the most useful, um, and it's like almost disappointing how simple it is, but you get so much value out of it, is just putting wherever you prefer this, your Copilot instructions or your Claude, whatever tool you use, or an agent skill. Um, I just put like whenever you make a code change, you must verify that it works using, I'll do, depending on what your stack is, .NET build and a .NET run or NPM run start, something. And if it doesn't work, keep changing until it does. So
Mhm.
that's, we're using GitHub Copilot at the client I'm at right now. And that's especially useful there because it doesn't go by, you're not billed by tokens, you're billed by premium requests with that, right? So within the same premium request, it'll continue to iterate. I've seen it go for, 30 minutes to an hour on the same request once until it finally gets the thing right. And before that would have been just a back and forth tug of war with the AI over and over, like it making silly linting and syntax mistakes, right? Um, I've also been experimenting with the GitHub Copilot SDK a little bit. That's what I would consider more like true agentic stuff. I've seen some pretty cool stuff come out of that. Um,
Well, tell us about that because I think by now most of our listeners have used Copilot inside Visual Studio or VS Code or even CLI and have used Claude in various forms. But the Copilot SDK is kind of new, and so like, what's the difference, and why would you use a Copilot SDK versus just installing the program?
yeah, it's a good question. Kind of a lot of these tools they've made have overlapping purposes, but there is a little bit of specific reason and like maybe some stuff they're stronger at than the other ways to use the tool, not even different tools, but different ways to use the tool. So like with the Copilot SDK, I kind of like to think of that as if I were to just use Copilot normally, quote unquote, and have a bunch of agent files and maybe agent orchestration even and some prompts that I've made and stuff, I consider that as it's mostly prompt files and instructions and it's mostly at prompts, I guess, doing the orchestration, and you have some code mixed in there. Maybe you have some bash scripts or something. And I think of the SDK as sort of flipping that. So like you have mostly code instead, and then that's orchestrating the prompts. So with SDK, I'm obviously a .NET guy, so I'm going to be using it C Sharp. So I have a bunch of C Sharp stuff that I've written, like tools and stuff, and I'm plugging that into Copilot and telling Copilot when to call the C Sharp stuff.
Mm.
And then, maybe I have a few agent files and prompts and stuff and things I want the Copilot SDK to analyze. But for the most part, that's being driven by this deterministic C Sharp code I've written. So um, I saw on Reddit when SDK first came out, they had this competition over the weekend, which I did not participate in because I was doing some other stuff in my personal life. But there were some cool tools that came out of that. Um, One of them, I think, was this PR like code review analyzer, basically. So you can tell it, hey, like use this GitHub MCP, get all the changes, like look at this PR, look at the files, and then plug that into the Copilot SDK, like, hey, analyze all this stuff. And then whatever it responds with, you can do whatever you want with that response in the C Sharp code. So if you want to display that like in a Blazor app, whatever. So just really cool stuff. If anything, the world is your oyster, and it's like it's hard to like focus on one thing because you can do like almost anything you want with it.
Mm. So it almost seems like an alternative for just maybe calling a Azure OpenAI uh, LLM, a deployed model.
Yeah, kind of. And I've thought about that too. It was like, well, I could hit an API endpoint with a model, right? You could do that. There's probably trade-offs under the hood. The SDK is just using the CLI executable anyway. So there's probably some pros and cons to that. But they're definitely making sure to just give you like a ton of different avenues to call AI in general. Like, so there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. In this case, there might be like little slight variations in each one of these ways, but they really want to make sure it's easy to use AI one way or the other.
Right, right. Now, in your blog, Dan in a Can, you've written a post about using agent skills in GitHub Copilot, and we on the show we've talked about AI tools and MCP servers and all of the tools, Claude, Cursor, Junie, etc. But can you define as we get into what is an agent skill? Because it seems like that's a new thing that wasn't really talked about a whole lot at the beginning of 2025.
Yeah, yeah. I think skills are awesome. And and by the way, whoever's listening to this, by the time you're listening to this episode, I'll almost certainly have my next article out, which is going to be on the Copilot SDK and how to use that.
Cool.
So skills came out, I think just it's less than 6 months ago for sure. It was made by an open standard by Anthropic, and I think what trips a lot of people up is that skills don't offer anything technically new. There's nothing you can do in a skill that you could not do just in an instructions file. It's the same thing. You're just giving one way or another, you're giving instructions to your LLM. The difference with skills is that it basically just helps you modularize them. So instead of like, I've got 10 different use cases of instructions I want to give Copilot, and they're just all shoved in my 3,000 line Copilot instructions file, right? That's okay. But now you can have 10 skills, for example, instead, and each one of those is sort of self-contained. So it makes them easier to share between projects. Like there's probably a bunch of project specific stuff in that huge Copilot instructions file. You can't just plop it in all your other projects. But if you have a skill that's like, here's how to do testing, you can plop that across your projects. It also saves on your context window. So that 3,000 line Copilot instructions file is getting injected into your context every single time. Skills have a name and description in the front matter, and exact same concept as MCP tools. The name and description gets sent in the context every time, and Copilot or whatever AI you're using is going to say, based on that name and description, I should use this skill in this case, and it's going to decide every prompt if it should take the rest of the contents of that skill. So you can have whatever other scripts in your skill folder. You can have bash scripts, you can have C# files, whatever you want, and then reference them from the main skill file, and it will attempt to only pull those into the context when they're relevant. So really, there's only two main advantages to skills: is it's modularizing and then saving in your context window.
So it makes me think of the Amazon Alexa skills, because that kind of uses the same term. So what's the same and what's different?
I'm trying to remember what the skills are with an Amazon Echo with Alexa. I think they're just like, I think those were before even LLMs were a big thing. That was just like, it's basically apps for Alexa. I think that's what they call skills.
The
If I'm remembering that right.
Yes. Yeah, we have some automated window shades, and it's just it's kind of like the integrations, but it seems very, very code centric. There's nothing fuzzy. There's nothing language model about it. So with Copilot skills, it sounds like if I have a pretty big Copilot instructions markdown file, that thing might get a lot smaller because some of the instructions in there in the different sections are just kind of instruct how to run my private build, how to run the unit tests, how to recreate my local developer database, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell people deterministic scripts are always going to be more reliable than AI. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's going to beat them every time. The reason we use AI is because almost every task we do in programming is novel, right? We don't have a script to write the exact app we're trying to do right now. That's why we're doing it ourselves. And that's why AI is useful. But it does mean if I have something I want done in the exact same way every time, like creating a new .NET solution or a new like XUnit project with, I've made a lot of XUnit projects. I know exactly what packages I like in it, like auto fixture and in substitute and stuff like that. I write a script for that. And then I tell AI to call the script. I don't trust AI to make it every time because it's going to make it with .NET 8 instead of 10. It's going to get not the latest version of the NuGet packages. There's just a bunch of places for it to mess up. So, and I probably use AI to help create that script too.
Yeah.
So I think there's a happy mixture of deterministic stuff. Still definitely has its place. It's more reliable 100% than AI. But
Mhm.
we found from AI coaching at my client a lot that a lot of times the best course of action is have AI help you write this deterministic script, and then that can be used by the AI in the future.
So you're using AI a lot. And we've seen some 2025 studies or really surveys about, 17% improved individual productivity and some various, it's just surveys. It's not an actual scientific study. It's just asking people, hey, what do you think happened? Well, let me pose that to you. What do you think has happened? Has it been a clear improvement for you? Has it been a clear improvement for your clients? A mixed bag?
Yeah, that is the question. And it's a very hard question to answer. So in my opinion, massive improvement for myself. Um, Obviously it's not scientific because I'm judging myself. I could be wrong, right? And in general, AI or not AI, measuring efficiency for developers is very difficult. So like you need a baseline across all your teams. We're probably going to try to do Dora metrics, something like that. And then if things do improve, was that because of AI? Was it because of something else? So 17% increased productivity, like what does that even mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's a bunch of other studies, like even from Microsoft themselves, that says using AI reduces critical thinking, which I totally see how that could be possible too. Um, we've kind of found that using AI and not just like this sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised, right? Using AI, but not just accepting the output it gives you, really verifying everything it gave you. Um, that still keeps your like programming muscles from atrophying, and you still get the benefit of using AI. So all the stuff that's normally important in programming, like working in small chunks, naming stuff well, that's more important. Like you get punished harder if you don't do that stuff when working with AI. Just because it moves so much faster, and whatever you do will be accelerated. And I think the most recent Dora report found that as well. Is like if you have poor practices, it's going to make those poor things move even faster. If you have good practices, it's going to accelerate that. Okay.
Well, speaking of that, anybody who's been doing software for a while understands that creating a brand new code base is a small point in time event. But most of the work of a programmer, most of the time, days, months, years, is spent inside of an existing code base, changing it in some way, enhancing it, refactoring it, yada yada. And so uh so much of the demos out there is I started from scratch and AI this and then boom, it built me that. And it's like, okay, even if that's the case, what has been your experience in existing systems where, I mean, the system might have been greenfield 10, 15, 20, whatever years ago, and everything since then has just been changes?
Yeah, I think that is a fantastic point to hit on because I think that's something a lot of people, maybe most people, miss. Like if you look at social media, all the hype around AI right now, and this is part of why I'm not worried about, for the most part, jobs going away, developer jobs going away from AI.
Mhm.
Uh, all the hype or the vast majority of the hype seems to be around novel stuff. So like a startup company with a new app. Um, like if you vibe code something, I think that can work fine for a few months. Um, but if you get to the point of you don't understand your own code base, that's a problem. So if you're that this matters a lot more for legacy stuff, right? So being able to use AI and accept the answer from the AI implies that you know what this correct idea looks like in the first place, right? So if you get to the point where you don't understand what the AI has made in this code base, you really don't know if you're accepting like the correct answer or not. You're just trusting the AI to also be the reviewer. And I think ultimately, like the buck has to stop with a human somewhere. Um, there's this slide that's kind of made the rounds. I don't know if you've seen it from IBM in 1979, and it says a computer must never make a management decision because a computer can never be held accountable, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with AI. Like you can't when the product goes down at prime time for your traffic, and the company loses $3 million, they're not going to be mad at Copilot. They're going to be
Right.
mad at you, and the Copilot's not going to lose its job. You are, right?
Yeah.
So whoever's on the line, the buck needs to stop with them. So legacy stuff, we see this all the time. This app is 10 years old and it has no tests, right? We just maintain it. We try as hard as we can to not add new features to it. We just want to keep it online. So AI can help with that. And in the sense of you can ask it questions about how the heck does this code base work? But you need to go and verify yourself if it's correct. And like you really like you super need to make sure that its changes were correct. And um one of the first things we tell teams is you need to at least have like some integration or some end-to-end tests before you make the changes and make sure they still pass after you like if you don't have that, I don't know how you guarantee your app still works. So
That's a great point. You mentioned these applications with no automated tests, but with AI's powerful ability to generate code, I would think in those cases that'd be the first type of code that you want to add is those characterization tests that just lock down what the application does right now in all kinds of situations, so that if we accidentally change it, we know.
I would not disagree with that. The characterization, the box test is actually that is what I tell people to start with, and they have the 0 tests in a code base. Like obviously you should have the unit tests and all that stuff too. But if you're starting from a place of 0 tests, I think the black box tests are the best place to start. Again, whatever if I ask AI to, hey, make 10 black box tests for me just to make sure I'm not blowing stuff up in this code base, we still have to understand the code base well enough to know those are correct tests. Because
Mm-hmm.
anyone who's used AI to help write tests has probably seen the, hey, this test is failing. Can you fix it for me? So it just removes the assert,
Remove the
or
assert.
it removes the production code that's making it fail. We've probably all seen that. You have to make sure that's not happening too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, um, we talked about Copilot quite a bit, but there is this, whole array. You got Cursor, how many? Claude and OpenAI Codex and JetBrains Junie, and then you got the open source Open Code, and now we got Open Claw, and are we up to 17 flavors of Copilot across all the different things? So, uh, do you use just one? Do you use two? Do you use multiple?
Yeah. So I kind of am like in this super luxury position of I work for a relatively small consulting company. It's like 150 people. And since we're a consulting company, they like super want us to be familiar with AI. So I can request licenses for like basically I think I have a Cursor, a Kiro, a Claude. So I get Copilot Pro Plus for being an MVP.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the ones I've tried, mostly Kiro and Claude, apart from Copilot, which I like both of those as well. I mean, like you said, they're all different flavors of pretty much the same idea. Um, but I do like seeing the different takes on, I don't know what to call it, I guess the harness. So like they all have a slightly different way of what comes out of the box. So Claude has its own stuff, and Claude is definitely, I think, the enthusiast preference. Like whenever you see a lot of hype on
Yeah.
social media or on AI, I feel like it's Claude code for whatever reason. Anthropic is usually the one making standards, and then
Yeah.
Kiro has its own stuff with steering, I think it calls it. I thought that was a pretty good idea. I kind of copied that and brought it into Copilot. Um, but yeah, I've super enjoyed just diving into all of them. It's been super fun.
Yeah. Now, do you also run some language models locally with Olama or LM Studio, or do you go straight to the APIs all the time?
Yeah, so I have not tried that, and it's been on purpose because I have not upgraded my desktop computer in almost 10 years now.
Oh, wow.
And now it's looking like I won't because of, it's been going on with RAM. But
Mm, yeah.
yeah, I either have 16 or maybe 32 on my desktop. I can't remember right now, but it seems like from everything I've looked up, you want 64 probably to run those locally.
Yeah. Well, I have 128 gigs of RAM, and I've got
Oh, wow.
16 gigs of VRAM on the and yes, it can, but still can't compete with Clots on it. And you can't run Clots on it locally. That's proprietary anyway. So yeah, I was just always curious to see if anyone else's mileage is kind of varied. But it looks like, as opposed to running some of the mini models to do very small and targeted things, coding just requires so much more context that I don't think any of our local computers are up to the task.
And I do think also, I love Copilot and all these other tools, obviously, but I do think there's also value in these open source things that you can run locally. We always need that stuff, right? Those are super important. So I love that those are still, even if these other tools have gained a ton of traction, that these open source smaller guys are still around.
Mhm. Yeah. Now, we've talked about the coding side of AI agents, but there's a whole nother world. There's the um, product managers who are saying, I want my piece of software to have an AI feature, right? Which is a totally different side. And um, what are you seeing are some of the slam dunk use cases that seem to kind of make sense these days, where if you already have an application, you're already processing data, then okay, it kind of makes sense to do, a few use cases.
Yeah. So I have a few thoughts around that. So one of the things is everyone wants an AI feature in their app now, which is okay.
Yeah.
But to do that in the first place, you need your data together because you need something to feed the AI. And it seemed, I would venture to guess most places don't have their data together. So whatever that is, you want to give it. Usually it's just very hard to wrangle that all together and get it kind of in a semi-structured spot. I also think no matter what you want to do, coding or otherwise, the more important it is that this thing runs the exact same way every time, the less reason you have to run AI, to use
Mm.
AI for it. So my bank transfer, ACH, it's pretty important that when I say $500 goes to this other account, every single time $500 goes there and it's the same
Yeah.
account. I probably hope they're not using AI under the hood for that, right? So AI is good. Like what I said before, it's good for these novel tasks that we don't have things written for, and it's probably not worth writing them for.
Hmm.
Anything that's kind of like analysis around big things of data, or at least we can get started with an AI analysis, right? I don't know off the top of my head if I can think of like just across broad apps, I've seen this AI use case work well. That
Hmm.
maybe there is one. I just don't know if I've seen that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
but
you're right about
wrangling your data for sure is up there.
you're right about the bank transfer, and it it goes back to architecture. The architecture of prompts is non-deterministic, whereas just regular bespoke code is deterministic. And so if you absolutely need determinism, then a language model prompt is the wrong architectural choice for that thing.
I would say that's its strength too, right? It's the strength and the weakness.
Yeah.
It's a large language model. It can do pretty much whatever I ask it, right? It can do novel stuff. It can be quote unquote creative like a human, but that's also the weakness. It's going to try to be creative every time, right? It's not going to do the same way every single time. So
Yep.
that's both why you'd want to use it and why you'd want to avoid it. It just depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah. There was one demo that Microsoft used for a long time in their conferences when talking about um, before large language models, when it was machine learning and Azure Cognitive Services. Now I know those things were the building blocks of what we now have with the language models, but it was very targeted training. So it's like a small language model training on sentiment detection in comments. And now it's a super easy prompt. So the scenario that I always look for with our clients is the part of their system where there are support tickets or there's comments from their customer base or any kind of free form text, and it's just text, and they're not giving a rate, satisfaction rating, but by looking at the free form comment, a couple sentences that they put in, super easy to do sentiment analysis and turn it into, like a number 1 through 5 of, is this person elated to angry or somewhere in the middle? Can we guess the mood at which the person drafted this text? And use that to just provide better customer service. That scenario pretty darn easy with today's tech.
Now, I do remember, now that you say that, probably 2 or 3 years before AI, like people were talking about AI, and we had those services available. I wrote this. It was just something I ran locally, but you could put in a hashtag on Twitter or something,
Hmm.
and it would run. I forget what it's called now, or even if it's still around, the Azure Sentiment API or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it would look for tweet. It would use a Twitter API, which is very expensive now. This is when it was free. To just look for past 100 hashtags with that or something, and then run sentiment analysis on all of them. Be like, oh, people are generally positive about this thing, which I'm sure when I made that, there were 10 paid services that were better already. But it was a cool thing to make. But I'm
Yeah.
sure that stuff had been around for, whatever, a decade on Google and Bing and all that they were using under the hood for your searches.
Yeah.
Um, and you saying that stuff kind of jogged my memory. Something I would love to see as a use case. I think AI is great with logs, helping you with logs. What I would love to see is your Azure logs or something, whatever you use, hooked up to whatever your on-call system is.
Hmm.
And that maybe that is hooked up to Slack or Teams or whatever you use. And by the time you have a prod error log, like that has kicked off Copilot or something, and it's made a PR for you by the time you see it. That would be amazing. Now,
Yeah.
maybe you have to review that PR and stuff, but that would be so cool. And it would tell you, like, here's the log I saw. Here's why I made the changes I did. I think the issue is coming from this chunk of code, and here's the fix. That would be amazing, especially
Yeah.
if I'm on call when that happens and it's on the weekend.
Right. For those scenarios, I see some people, for lack of a better term, getting lazy and putting ordered instructions into prompts. Like, go here, then do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. But you look at the, if there were 5 steps in the instructions, you look at the 5 steps, and only one of the steps actually requires a language model. The rest of it is go to this known location, grab some files or grab some data and pull it over here. Another one is call this web service and get the return value with and and it's all in a prompt, but only once you gather the data, then there's the actual prompt of look at it and use some, the fuzziness to answer some kind of question about the data analysis. And I, that's an interesting phenomenon because we can write code to do the deterministic steps, but there's something that draws people just to put it in the prompt. Have you seen
Yeah.
that same
So
thing?
100% agree with you. Oh, yeah. And I think, uh, like, I think it's just what's easiest, right? Like, this will work
Sort
80% of
of.
the time. So, okay. And it's English. That's easy. Um, and like you said, maybe we could have used AI. We still could have used the AI just to write a bash script instead or something for each of those
Yep.
steps. And now we have a
Yep.
bash script that runs the same every time instead. Good example. You can use this, but I charge royalties. So something I use now, I have a personal GitHub repo of like all my blog posts and presentations in Markdown format. And then I have a skill to do conference research for me. I say, like, find me conferences that currently have call for papers open or will soon. And then when you find one, help me research that conference by looking at past year's agendas of like what was accepted. It's like what's likely to get in. So that's good because for an AI because the links are very not similar. So sometimes it's
Mm,
like the conference website / 2024 agenda, but sometimes they completely switched it up year to year and
yeah.
different conferences are different. And the AI like has a pretty good idea. It usually does a good job of finding the correct links. And before, I technically I could do that manually. I don't want to deal with that, right? So I tell it to use Playwright and it goes off for literally 30 minutes and it comes back with like 10 good conferences that sometimes I've never heard of. That's a great, I think, example of we pretty like I maybe could write a bash script for this, but it would be like 1,000 lines of like all the different cases.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you've got your own personal helper AI agent.
Yep.
I want to dig into that just a little bit more. You said it just goes off and does things. What is the host of that process and where is it running? And when does it decide to run? Do you press a button, command line?
Yeah, that it's just manual right now. I have to prompt it. I
Okay.
have thought about that, like, oh, I could run this like on a cron job once a week or something. They did have, if you saw, GitHub just came out with what do they call it? Agentic workflows, like literally 3 days ago or something,
Okay.
where you can write your GitHub actions with Markdown, basically, instead of YAML, and then an agent will pick it up. So I have thought about doing something like that, like treating GitHub actions as a cron job to kick off my LLM or something.
Okay. So it's a prompt. So you kick it off command line. Copilot CLI. What is the command line to kick it off?
I'm just using VS Code.
Okay.
I could do
So
CLI too, but
all right. So
yeah.
so you're in VS Code and you have a markdown file that you paste in, or what does it look like? The starting entry point.
Yeah, I have, it's a skill. So it's just a markdown file. And I'm trying to remember now if I have other, I think it's literally just the skill.md that is like, go research stuff. If I ask about new conferences, then kick this skill off and go research using Playwright. And I do have some instructions in there about like, if you're looking for past year's conferences, here's some URL formats you can try, but
Hmm.
like try other things too. Don't limit yourself to that. Um, and then look in I have a folder of all my talks, like suggest the ones that are most likely to get accepted, basically.
Okay. So in VS Code, one advantage you have is you have access to the file system of whatever directory you're in. When it crawls the websites, does it pull down and create new files, or does it just pull it into the current prompts context window?
Yeah, it creates a new markdown for me, a new markdown file for me for every conference that I found. It was like,
Mm,
here's the summary, here's the breakdown of this conference, here's the topics they like. And I think it's like, here's the top 5 of your conferences that you should submit. Something like that.
okay. That right there, I think that's a big idea when it comes to some of these personal AI agents is just having a folder to read and write files. Because if I'm in Microsoft Copilot or Chat GPT, if I'm in a web browser in a chat user interface, the only way in or out of that is copy paste. Whereas if I'm running it somewhere on my computer where it has the folder on the file system, then it just opens up all kinds of possibilities like that. And inherently, I guess I get a better memory between sessions because now you've got those markdown files, right? When that prompt is finished, you got all these markdown files, a whole lot of information about these conferences, and you can craft something else, explore them.
Yeah. And, I'm not trying to sell anything or like do something fancy with a web app. Like, keep it simple, right? Like, I
Yeah.
know it works in VS Code. It's just my personal content library, basically.
Yep.
And this is
Yep.
kind of how we coach people to use it anyway with the like do a plan mode first.
Mhm.
I like to create a planning document as an artifact instead of just keeping it in the conversation, because then, like you said, you can come back to it later and reference it. But it's essentially the same idea.
Well, as we close up here, I'd like to ask you to project into the future. We don't know what's going to come 6 years from now, but um, if you remember back before we were running software on smartphones, which basically a pocket computer, right? There was a time where in order to run some software, we had to at least have a laptop computer, but desktop computer, and now we're all walking around with these pocket computers that can kind of do quite a few things. And so, if you were to fast forward through this era, and yourself being a very experienced software engineer, and also helping others think about how to do software well, businesses will continue to need software, but what's the future role of the software engineer given this industry trend?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big questions, and it's one we've talked a lot about on our team at my current client. I'm currently on a team of we do AI coaching. It's like
Mhm.
we're paid basically to stay on the cutting edge of stuff and then spread that knowledge around teams. It's it's a great role.
Yeah.
What we have talked about is developers are not going away. The skill set is still needed. Maybe you shift on the spectrum more towards less developing, more reviewing the AI output. Not zero developing. You still have your manual changes and you still have to correct the AI. But if, like I was saying before, if you don't have an idea in your head of what correct looks like, how can you say, yeah, keep that suggestion from Claude or Copilot or whatever? And I think it's actually more important now to be working with other humans. So, like, if I'm a junior and I'm just learning from the AI, I really don't know if it's telling the truth or not. Like, it could be hallucinating on this particular thing I asked it about. But if I'm like pairing with a senior or something, and we ask the AI something, the senior can say, "Oh no, that was completely off. Like, don't listen to it there." You sort of steer this person in the right direction. So I think if you're not doing those things, um, same idea. If you're not doing these practices that were already good, it's going to be the impact's going to be harder. Um,
So what you're saying is that all of the work around the software development lifecycle and agile and cloud and DevOps doesn't just go away because some tool can generate a whole bunch of code real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say, even for myself, if I'm learning something new, like I've been working on making a VF extension, and that's completely new to me.
Mhm.
So I've been using Claude Opus 4.6 a lot for that, and it has been amazingly helpful for learning how that works. But I've still many, many times gone to the actual documentation in my browser manually for VS Code extensions to learn how that stuff works, because I've never done it before, and I'm going to treat that as the source of truth. So it's kind of like a trust but verify. So on the other hand, it has been very helpful to 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 even let me know the correct search terms to put in the first place, right? So it would have been like it would have been an unknown for me, and now at least it's a known unknown that I can look up, right? So I think it's
Nice.
very helpful in that sense as well.
Nice. Well, Daniel Ward, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing with us what you've been doing with AI and AI agents. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll be in NDC Copenhagen this year later, and I will be if you are local and listening to this, local San Antonio, I will be presenting at a conference at the end of February, the end of this month, called More Human Than Human on GitHub Copilot SDK. So if you're local, come
Nice.
check that out.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And dear listener, until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure and DevOps podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Visit our sponsor, ClearMeasure, at www.clearmeasure.com. And on behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.